All right, make sure that you are saving and incrementing your file again, as long as everything went successfully. Because if anything goes wrong, those increments are going to save your life. You're going to be able to go back to a previous state of your setup that was not messed up. Okay. So mostly what we're going to do now is use constraints. That's typically how your controls are going to affect your skeleton. That way they're not actually connected in our hierarchy at all. They just do something to the bones to move them around. We're going to save the feet for last because that is a special, more complicated setup, but we can do everything else first. So let's start in the root. For our root controller, we just want to move and rotate this root bone. So if we go to a rigging menu, constraints, we have a number of different constraints up here. And if we've never handled this before, now's a good time to introduce you to them. We have a parent constraint, which just kind of like parenting allows you to move and rotate children, but it also allows you to turn them on and off. It doesn't include scale though, unlike actual parenting. A point constraint controls the position, so the translates. Orient constraint controls the rotates. Scale controls the scale. Aim is something where it takes a certain direction, a vector for your object, and points it towards the other object. And then pull vector is special for IK handles. So what we want is a parent constraint for this. So we need the constrainer to be selected first, and then the constrained object to be selected second. Frequently, you're going to see me, I'm turning off the manipulator by hitting Q. So instead of having translate, rotate, or scale, Q is nothing, and it's just your ability to select things. That's going to help a lot here because we're going to have to select bones a lot, and the pivot points are in the same place for a lot of these. So our root control first, and our bone second, and then we do constrain parent. We want to take a look in here as the very first one to make sure that maintain offset should be turned on, even though this really shouldn't matter for the most part, and that it is selecting all the translates and all the rotates, and the weight is 1. The weight is how much it's affecting it. So if we just hit reset settings here, all of that should be the defaults anyway. And we're going to hit apply and close. And if we want to test this, when we grab this, it moves the whole skeleton, which the only thing that it shouldn't be moving is the IKs. I don't know why they're actually moving. I thought the IK handles would be floating in space. There might be a setting for that. Let me just check real quick. They aren't parented to anything, so I'm not sure why the IKs aren't just floating in space. I actually expected something different. So I'm going to move that over to one side and then grab one of the IK hand controls. Interesting. The IK seems to be moving with the root bone. That's a new one for me. So if I put that back, I'm going to put the root bone back and check the IK hand. So those translates X of 1, Y of 2. Okay. Then we move it somewhere vastly different and check again. X of 2, Y of 2. Yeah, it is changing. Huh. That's not supposed to happen. And I can see the rotate plane solver was still hanging out here. I'm not sure if that's going to represent a problem for us or not. So for the moment, I'm going to continue on as if that's not an issue, but it does have me concerned, and it's a good thing that I just saved a version. I'm going to go ahead and iterate that save right away so that I can go back to version 4. And this is version 5 now where that is being hooked up. So let's just hope that that's not going to affect anything. Is this pivot point off? Oh, I didn't actually reset this entirely. There we go. Now it's back in the exact right spot. All right, so for our hip sway controller, we want to parent constrain this bone. Its pivot point is up here, but we're going to parent constrain that, and that's going to create the swaying sort of effect. So controller followed by the bone, constrain, parent. And so now if we rotate this, that's what happens right now. I mean, the ankles shouldn't move, but this is correct. We put that back. Our controllers can also be parented to each other, but I'm going to do that after I do the spine pieces, just to show you the difference. So for our spines, all we want is an orient constraint for these. We don't want them to actually move. So first, select the controller. Second, select the joint, constrain orient. And one more time, if it's the first time, go into the option box, make sure that we reset the settings, and we want to maintain offset. Okay. Hit add. So this will control that one particular bone. Same thing over here. Constrain orient. Okay. If ever you do one of these constraints and you see the bones shudder or go into a different position immediately, undo and maintain offset wasn't turned on. Okay. Same thing is going to be the orient setup for a lot of these different bones. So for the neck bone, that's all we need. For the skull, which was this joint down here. Okay, so if I move the skull, if I move the neck, okay, they are different. And our jaw is actually the same thing as well. So we can grab the jaw. We have to make sure to get this joint right here. All right. So that's enough just for the moment. What I'm going to show you is that the rig is currently not working the right way because we need to parent these controllers. So if we move the root controller around, the skeleton does indeed move, but none of these controllers went with it. If I try to rotate the spine controller, it's doing the right thing, but it's not in the right position. And that's because we need our controllers to sort of be in a parenting structure too. So our hip sway controller, for instance, needs to maintain this kind of relationship, this distance from the bone that it's controlling, but it needs to move when this one moves. So that's just a simple case of parenting. So we select our child, then our parent, and hit P. And so we want to check our root control has hip control as its child. Okay. And we want the spine to be a child of the root control also. So we could middle mouse drag here in the outliner if we want to. Spine 2 should be a child of spine 1. Like that. Neck should be a child of spine 2. Head should be a child of neck. And jaw should be a child of head. Okay, that's so that when we move our root, see, the entire thing moves around. When we move the hips, only the hips should move, but the root controller is still able to displace it. If we select our spines together, they both rotate. But if I select just one, this one moves the upper body. This one leaves the lower spine alone, but still rotates correctly. Good, so far so good. The neck should move the entire head area around. The head should move all of those appropriate bones, including the jaw, and the jaw just moves itself. Great. Doing just fine so far there. So yeah, once you set up the constraint, then we need to do the parenting as well. By the way, this master control will be moving anything that can move freely through space. That will be all IK controllers, all pull vectors controllers, and the root control. We could parent that right now, but I'll just do that last once everything else is set up. Let's take a look at the constraint for the eyes, which is an interesting one. So this is already set up to move the 3 controllers around, but we want to aim constraint each joint to each controller. So first we want the constrainer, then the constrained, select in that order, and we want aim. So for this one, let's not maintain offset. We want it to look directly at this controller, but we have to be aware of which vector is the one that should be doing the looking. So if I select my joint here and just zoom in, Z is the forward vector. So our aim vector, and it's always written in these fields x, y, z in that order. We want the aim vector to be the last field, like that. And then our up vector y is already correctly set. So it should be 0, 0, 1 and 0, 1, 0. All right. Constrain all axes. Yep. And then we can select one more time the constrainer, then the constrained, apply. All right, so we didn't actually see anything change, but now if I move, you can see that's rotating. And if I select it, we should see that, yes, the Z axis is pointing towards the eyeball. There we go. And Y is still facing upward. All right, great. So I can reset this. And I can do the same thing for the other, the constrainer, then the constrained, apply. All the same settings. So when I move both of these, both of those joints are rotating around to track it. And when we lock the mesh of the eyeballs to those joints, then they will be tracking around and it will look really cool. Okay. Sometimes people parent this to the head controller. I prefer to just leave it out in space in case you want your character to track something. But in more simple animation situations, you could do that. All right, so make sure you're returning all of your controllers back to 0 as we're going through, and we'll move on down the arms. The shoulder is relatively simple. It looks weird, but it's really just orient constraining that joint down there. So I'm going to hit Q again to get rid of my manipulator. Constrain, orient. Oh, I didn't select it. Constrainer, then constrained, orient. There we go. And we can do this for the opposite shoulder. Test them. Yep, that's what we want. All right, and now we're handling our IK. So our IK is a little bit different, and the arms are a bit different still, even than a typical IK that you might set up. This controller, we want to control the position of the IK handle. We already sort of handled the tough part of that, but just know that that's a point constraint. So make sure you've got the correct IK. That would be IK left in this case. So we want the constrainer, which is this, then the IK left. And if you're selecting in the outliner, hold down Control to multi-select. Don't do Shift. You'll get everything in between. And we're going to do constrain point. Since it's the first time I believe we've used that one, let's go inside and make sure that we've got maintain offset turned on, constraining all axis, weight of 1. And we hit add. So now when I move this, it should move the IK. But you see how the hand is just kind of rotating in space. So that's the second part of this controller. We want it to orient constrain both the wrist bone and the forearm bone.